Yeah, just got a message in German.
Multilingual. We're here with the wonderful Michael Eldred, who's giving of his time for a pre-record for the International Symposium on Technology and Society, which is going to go live on November 12th to the 15th. My name is Katina Michael. I'm an academic at Arizona State University, and I'm with a special guest today who's got a paper at his Test 20. It's the Australian Michael Eldred, who's currently coming live to us from Cologne in Germany. Now, Michael was born in Katoomba and grew up in Lura, in the inner west, I would say, near our mountains, in the Blue Mountains, the beautiful Blue Mountains that's close to Sydney in Australia. He started studying in 1970 at the University of Sydney, and he completed 2 science degrees, majoring in mathematics, but including 1 year of philosophy. And that was a vital year because he then decided in 1975 to return to philosophy. And we met this wonderful man through a mutual friend, or we knew of him through a mutual friend, Professor Rafael Capurro, who wrote this wonderful book, Ethics and Robotics. And he kept telling us about this wonderful philosopher that we had to meet. My husband, M.G. Michael, a theologian, historian, and philosopher, was intrigued by this Michael Eldred, and they got to meet in the flesh sometime, I think, around my first child or second child was born. Second child, of course. And we're here with him without further
2012.
ado. 2012, yes. It was, I said to Michael, I said, you know, well, how was the meeting with Michael Eldred? And he said, Katina, there were like 3 Michaels at the table. But he said, this man has to be one of the greatest living philosophers. And I feel very humbled to be in his presence today, given I read a lot of his work and I struggle from the perspective of learning. I'm not a philosopher by training, but his work, I know, is absolutely integral to technology today. And so I want to give you an opportunity, Michael, to give us a few words in opening about your background, perhaps.
My background, well, as you said, I studied mathematics at the University of Sydney for 5 years. I did 2 degrees, majoring in pure mathematics, but also doing mathematical statistics and applied mathematics. And I got interested in a branch of mathematics at the time that was very, very new. It had only been inaugurated just after the Second World War, called category theory. And category theory is renowned for attempts to try to prove theorems in mathematics that are applicable in all sorts of fields. It goes to a higher level and then tries to prove theorems at these abstracter level in a way of kind of hitting many flies with one swat. Like I got interested in things like Russell's paradox. I did a thesis on Russell's paradox. I was interested in the questions of theory of theories in mathematics and so on. And in the end, I came to the conclusion, I kind of hit a dead end. I said, mathematics isn't going to answer the questions that I'm wanting to answer. And that inevitably ended up in philosophy, where I started over again. And that was a time in 75 when things were running really hot at the University of Sydney with a split philosophy department. There had been fights over, first of all, the introduction of Marxism into the department. And then the next year in 74, there was a big row over whether feminism could be taught, should be taught as philosophy in the department. And at that point, there was a big split. That's where it just broke down, and there were 2 departments. And I was in this more politicized department, interested in Marxism and feminism. And I met by chance, or not by chance because I was in the department, a guest lecturer from Germany called Michael Eldred. from Constance University, who gave a talk, or a course, or various courses, but one on Marx's Capital. And I did that course, and I started reading Marx's Capital, Das Kapital, in a way completely differently from how I'd previously experienced Marx. And it was a primary text reading, primary text. And I said, this is the way to go. You've got to read primary texts, and you've got to try and make sense of these primary texts and not rely on secondary literature. So that was my introduction to reading Marx, and then Hegel, because the reading propagated by Michael Eldred was very much influenced by rereading Hegel in connection with Marx. And that's what I ended up in Germany, studying, doing a postgraduate research, writing my PhD in an attempt to reconstruct and extend Marx's project, which started with Capital, but he had envisaged an entire theory of bourgeois society, starting with an analysis of the economy, but not stopping there, and going to the theory of state, to a theory of bourgeois morality, ethics, as a whole range of things was first projected when he first wrote down his plans in, say, 1845. It was an incredibly ambitious and comprehensive theory of the bourgeois form of society. And that really got me going, and it put me at loggerheads with all the orthodox interpretations of Marx and the ways that Marx had been read as, say, Capital is a theory of economics.
Yes.
You know, the economics of capitalism, which is still, is still largely how it's read today. And under this influence of a Hegelian reading, I got to know this thing called the value form, which appears in the first chapter of Capital, Das Kapital, which had always given rise to enormous controversy and enormous puzzles about how do you interpret this thing? What, and why on earth did Marx publish himself no less than 4 different versions of the value form analysis? Why? And that leads you then, when it was this thing about dialectical thinking, that's Hegelian thinking. What do we do? And a lot of Marxists said, well, this is just rococo ornamentation. Out with it. And the nitty-gritty starts to get going when you're into the theory of surplus value, the exploitation of the working class, and this. So, whoa, before you get there, you've got this value form analysis, which provides the basis for a theory of money. And money turns out to be that which becomes capital. In a systematic way, if you try to think through what capital is, you come back, well, it's money in circulation. So these concepts, they hang together in what Hegel says is a dialectical way. But that's also speculative in the sense that this very word form is not just not just the insipid meaning that we have of form today, like form and content. Yeah, everybody knows form and content. No, form is one of the standard translations of Plato, Plato's idea. We talk about Plato's theory of forms. Forms. So this value form somehow has to do with ideas, but in this deeper sense of what Plato aimed at, and then what Aristotle aimed at as the eidos, which means literally the looks of things, the looks of a being as it presents itself as a being. It took me about 20 years to figure that out, but it was it really was a breakthrough. Marx put me onto this social aspect. social form aspect, and that people in capitalism, whether you're a worker or a capitalist or you're a landowner or you're a banker, whatever you are associated with others via the value form in various guises. I mean, starting with money, but via commodities, you know, via loan capital, via production setups, factories, that land is also a form of, comes under the value form. You get ground rent from land and so on. So that put me on to a whole different understanding of form as an ontological thing, ontological study. I mean, because it was to do with association, is obviously social ontology. There is no such thing as social ontology unless you believe John Searle, who does it from a completely different point of view. I did it from another point of view because this whole understanding of what ontology is, I gained by starting to read Heidegger after I finished my PhD. I did a translation of a big book by Peter Sloterdijk, very thick. It made him extremely well known overnight. It was a big bestseller in Germany. I translated it into English for Minnesota University Press. Yeah. And he had a chapter on Heidegger in there. And I'd heard of Heidegger, heard of this book called Being in Time. And I said, oh, that's about physics or something. I don't know. So I started reading Heidegger. And Heidegger has some brilliant lectures in the 1920s. He was known as the one who has resuscitated Aristotle, has resuscitated Plato, has resuscitated the so-called pre-Socratics by a new kind of reading that was called phenomenological. Mm-hmm. And so I started to learn, you know, what is phenomenology? What is it? It's a way of trying to get very close to the phenomena. And it's no accident that Hegel's first and famous book, 1807, what is it? Phenomenology of mind, or des Geistes. I prefer to translate it as phenomenology of mind. So I was already very much interested in phenomena. And phenomena, how can you see phenomena and bring them into a well-fitting and adequate concept? And Hegel does that in a well-connected way. And this connection is done by the dialectical. Through the dialectics, you get the connections between the concepts, which are progressively conceptualizing the various phenomena, and you see how they hang together. This is the same thing which is going on in Capital, in Das Kapital from Marx. If you read it that way, and not as a story, but as a progression of concepts in which build up, you get a bigger picture of how capitalism hangs together with all these different features, all these different facets.
Definitely, Michael. I think being born after the controversy of your department, I was born in 76. It's very interesting that my generation has grown up with a watered down version of everything you're talking about. So we never are asked as technologists or engineers to go back to the actual sources. We're always getting a copy of a copy of a copy, which sort of loses its meaning. We're given this simplistic view of what, you know, the different types of ethics are. We're not challenged as students to go back and to read. I had to read Das Kapital, and mind you, I had great difficulty reading it. As a 20-year-old. You have to try and read it again. It was only through the economic lens, neoclassical economic theory. It was only through this kind of, you know, use value equals this, and it is about money, and it's about, you know, volume and production and what have you. It was about, you know, almost a whole different idea to what you're talking about. And so you're exposing us to the need of several things as a younger generation coming through. One is start reading the fundamental philosophers, of whom you've mentioned many so far. Second is dig deep and look at other lenses of the same reading. Don't just believe the first, oh, it's economic or what have you. And that's what you're doing. You're challenging us in your latest book that is under current writing and revision. It's called The Digital Age Challenges for Today's Thinking. And what I want us to do for a moment is to go back. And I want to ask you the question, why is it necessary to go back to the ontological drawing board to question the ontology we inherited, for example, from Plato and Aristotle? And then sort of maybe rebuttal what I've stated as being what is happening in today's generation.
Yeah. Good question. Now, why did I feel the need to go back to Aristotle, and especially in particular to this ontology of productive movement that Aristotle has, which is extremely famous. The big questions, or two of the big questions of Greek philosophy were, what is movement? They were confronted with a world that moves, and what is time? Mm-hmm. And Aristotle's ontology of movement is one that is fashioned upon the paradigm of productive movement. It takes and you'll find the same paradigm in Plato.
Yes.
Plato, both of them talk a lot about craftsmanship, and use a famous example of a carpenter. Mm. And this carpenter provides the paradigm in the sense that the carpenter is in the position through his or her know-how to take wood, to work upon it in order to produce, say, a table. And from this very simple paradigm, you have the famous triad of concepts in Aristotle's ontology of movement: dynamis, which means power, energia, which means energy, or literally at workness. So, and the third concept is entelecheia, which means having something in its end, which we could say the end product. So the carpenter, by virtue of his know-how, which is a force, is able to work, put this know-how to work in order to produce something. So it's effective, it's productive, it's effective. And this underlying concept of movement, or ontology of movement, with these three characteristic concepts, became the foundation for thinking about movement of all kinds, physical movements of all kinds, especially. And it's no mistake, it's no accident that when Newton comes to formulate his laws of motion, although he formulates them in equations of motion, he too is talking about force and energy, and using these laws of motion to predict what comes out of it. What is the finished product through the effects of this force? So you've got implicitly underlining even physics, theories of motion, which are formulated in mathematical equations. Underlying that, you've got a whole implicit ontology which is just taken for granted. Yes. It's in fact saying movement is basically, all movement is basically effective causal movement. Yeah, and then you can ask, well, is that really the case? And this is where my work on the value form, or value in connection with the association of people in a society, in particular in a capitalist society, comes back in, because if you're talking about the movement that takes place between people, you know, these are interchanges. These are what I call an interplay. People are in interplay with one another, and this whole paradigm of productive movement, being able to understand movement in some way causally, might be many causes. You have multifactorial analysis of movement. You have the attempt through statistical, mathematical statistics to come to terms with many very complicated movements, but it's all basically still in principle, it's thought of as causally. But if you move to association through an interplay of people with one another, you have, you know, people assessing each other, evaluating each other, estimating each other. If you have association with somebody, you have to be polite. This politeness is a form of esteeming, of estimating another person. And then say on the very mundane level of, say, making a deal with someone, I've got a set of headphones that I want to sell secondhand to someone, and this other someone comes to me and looks at the headphones and says, well, they look okay, how much are they? And we have to come to an agreement. He doesn't just wrench them out of my hand and gives me $5 and he's off, right? He could do that, but it's only a negation of what normally happens, is that we come to an agreement. And nobody can say in advance, neither me as the seller nor he as the buyer, how it will go.
Yes.
There's nobody as a single source who is controlling this interchange. And interchange is a kind of movement.
Yes.
So this paradigm, you know, of a carpenter making a table through the exercise of a productive force. He knows his stuff. He knows carpenter. He knows his carpentry. Just doesn't work. It's an unsuitable ontology for the situation of interchange. And you can say the same thing for, say, the art of rhetoric. You know, rhetoric. I mean, politics is just full of rhetoric. People talking. Politicians have to speak. They have to say things. And with Aristotle's art of rhetoric, you have another kind of paradigm of a speaker talking to an audience and talking very skillfully, you know, with rhetorical flourishes and clever little side arguments, and he's being very charming and he's charismatic and and the whole thing is aimed at getting the audience to where you want it to be. That is, accepting your view of things. It's an art of persuasion, which is not dead today. Any advertising is an art of persuasion. And the interesting thing is, the very interesting thing is that Aristotle, in this very famous first book on the art of rhetoric, he tries to press the rhetorical situation into the form of something productive. So the parallel is, just like a carpenter, the rhetorician or the orator is skilled, knows his stuff. He can manipulate, he can persuade, right? And so he'll just do that, and he'll get the people to where he wants them to be. But the problem is, the people, the audience is composed of people who are listening, and they listen. They may be persuaded, maybe not, and say, that's not a good argument, or he's leaving something out, he's saying something wrong here. No? So it's an interplay. What the speaker says is evaluated, estimated. Is he telling nonsense? Is he telling the truth? Is he being slimy? Or is he very straightforward, convincing, really, telling it straight? So you need another ontology. It's another kind of movement. It's a back and forth.
Yes.
It's a back and forth that the speaker is in a back and forth with the audience, and the audience is assessing, maybe question and answer at the end, and they become a question, and then the speaker doesn't handle it well. And so this is why I say the productive ontology, the ontology of productive movement, is inadequate to understanding the kind of movement I call interplay, which is the associating interplay of people in all sorts of situations. And in these situations, you always have an esteeming, an estimating go on, estimating the power of someone else. Right? Yes. Is she or he talking nonsense, like you're estimating, or they're just telling you gunk, or is it really, wow, I never saw things that way before. She's explaining it so well. So that's what I say. You've got esteeming going on, and this comes back to this value, this whole value thing with the value form that crops up with commodities and money. These really, mundane things, secular things. You've got to buy bread and you've got to buy vegetables, and it's all done with money, and money is source of all evil and so forth, which it probably is. But it also has a lot of advantages that you can actually go buy something that you want to have. And this is, but they have value. Things have value, and you can say, okay, this is economic value. But on the other hand, you've got ethical values. You've got, human rights, the right to life, liberty, the right, the freedom to determine of yourself where you're going to live. You've got a freedom to hire your skills and abilities to someone, or to try to become independent. So, and you have the human rights, which is the highest values of the protection of health, of life, that you're not just being killed, exploited. These really poor extremes of being misesteemed, not esteemed at all, but just the opposite. But it still comes under the heading of esteem, because it's its negation. And so there's an actual link between values in this economic form and these other ethical values that are normally spoken about. And I say that these values, when you're talking about, you're always talking about social interplay. Social interplay. Which means people are esteeming, estimating, evaluating each other, and that is a fluid situation which can only be accounted for through another ontology of movement, an alternative ontology of movement, which is not under control. It can't be controlled, it can't be mastered, which is what technoscience is all about. I mean, technoscience has grown out of these humble beginnings from the paradigm of the carpenter producing a table, the application of a force, putting it to work to produce something. And Western civilization, we in the West, and now globally have come completely, through 2.5 millennia, we've come so far that we've got these incredible sciences. What modern science can do in all sorts of areas is just, quite literally amazing. And so Western science is very proud of itself. And you could even say it's hubristic because it doesn't see anything else. It only sees this mastery of movement and change of all kinds as its be-all and end-all, as its raison d'etre. But you've got this other kind of movement. And that one of the main things to note about this technoscience, because it's based on the paradigm of productive movement, it treats everything it treats is reduced to a what, to a thing. And that applies in particular also to human beings, because it can only treat human beings as what's, because it doesn't, otherwise it don't work. you want to get the behavioral patterns of people. You want to get what's driving someone instinctually, or you might have technology being developed via algorithms to do preemptive policing. You've got patterns of behavior that you can study. Yes. And you can put them into algorithms. You can get the algorithms through big data to learn from all the data that's being collected, that these data will then eventually tell you in a specific case of someone whose data are being collected, that can be put through this algorithm, and you can say, it's highly likely this person is going to commit a crime. And that's one of the main ideas behind preemptive policing, is that you've got some idea of what's going to happen. And that's what you're interested in within this paradigm of productive movement. You're not interested in just looking at what's going on there. You are wanting to predict. And what you do there with the predict, you want to know what's coming. You need a prediction, which means you also have a very specific understanding of time. It's linear. You've got the future coming down the track along the timeline. And you want to be able to say what's going to happen. And the first one to really do that in a spectacular way was Newton with his laws of motion. You've got 3 extremely simple equations, laws of motion. Yes. From these 3 simple equations, you can write down the paths of celestial bodies to an incredibly precise degree, and it all works. And then you can take these same laws of motion and apply it to other cases of physical things in movement. Great. So you start to do that with the social sciences. And then you get psychological theories that are going to tell you with a certain probability, because it's not as good as Newton, what is going to happen next, or what is likely to happen next. And that you can, some authority, the state, the police, the tax department, whatever, and take measures to counteract or, say counteract the actions of individuals. But these individuals are basically being reduced to what's for this purpose.
Yes.
Yeah. When you get to the other side, if you start treating people not as what's but as who's, then you're in this other situation of interplay. And you need the ontology of interplay, which requires concepts of esteem, estimation, what you recently called respect, You need all these rituals that we don't treat each other simply as things, as what's, and that's completely impossible for a social situation. You know, you don't, if you push somebody out of the way when you're walking along the street because they're in the way, they're walking too slow or something, that's just a big no-no. You don't do that. You know? But if it's a bicycle, you just push the bicycle aside, right? When it comes to dealing with people, you have to estimate them as some who, not as some what. Yeah.
I've got so many thoughts, Michael. I mean, what's coming to my mind, this language, like the human out of the loop, machine to machine, there's no person in there, or the subject becomes the object. We say in RFID world, in IoT, in the Internet of Things, and the reduction of this complex thing that we are, organic, analog, into this digitized ones and zeros, as if we can be so easily, you know, this metaphor that the heart is like a computer or the brain is like a computer. All these metaphors that are sinking in through information technology realms and engineering realms, it's reducing us. It's reductionistic. It's almost putting us to nothingness. You know, beyond the thing, we then become almost nothing because the thing is dead, right? Things are usually inanimate. If I pick up a frame, the frame is not moving. There's no interplay, as you call it. There's no estimation. Perhaps the content might be, but there's no real persuasion there. But what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling from you, the first thing I thought about were waves in the ocean when you started to talk about movement and interplay. I then started to think about Keats and his odes to a Grecian urn, this notion of changeability. We're always moving. We're always in that motion. We're about to do something. But then I thought about Norbert Wiener in his bidirectional cybernetics thinking, right? These feedback loops. I like the idea of interplay in the social realm because it actually means that we're here for, like, we're here for a reason. There's a reason behind our here-ness, if you want to put it like that. There must be. And reducing it to just a monetary transaction. And then why does the world esteem these technoscientists so much? And they're so persuaded by them? Is it because these devices are shiny? What is it, Michael? All of these things. Do you have any reflections on what I've said?
It's the seductiveness of this technoscience is quite incredible. It's and what lies behind it is this promise of mastery of movement over movement through algorithmic control. And the algorithms you have to conceive as, I mean, they're binary code, aren't they? An algorithm is nothing other than binary code that has been written by a programmer and then perhaps modified by so-called deep learning, but it remains binary code. And what does it work on? It worked on the data. And the data are those numbers, these binary numbers that are fed to the algorithm. And what the algorithm does, like the carpenter, the algorithm works through the data to produce the third binary number, which is your result. And this result could be triggering something. It could be an image. It could be anything you like. But the point is that the algorithm is actually a logical and digitized understanding of certain situation of movement in the world. And it's put in, it has to be conceived and then it has to be encoded so that it can do its thing automatically by being fed data. So that it means that our logical understanding can be put into segments for different situations and then outsourced to a digital device, and that does what it's supposed to do. Or maybe it does what it's not supposed to do. In any case, if we rely on these devices, and we have to rely on these devices increasingly. Our dependence is increasing exponentially from year to year. These devices then turn out through the algorithms to determine what we can do and what we cannot do. So they have an enormous power over our life movements. So we live our lives not just in interplay with each other, but we also live our lives in interplay with algorithms, and in particular with algorithms that tell us what we can do, and algorithms which stop us, prevent us from doing certain things, and also with faulty algorithms that are either they've got a programming error in them, or else they don't fit the situation. They've been misconceived for the situation you're in. And so we're kind of outsourcing our whole understanding of the world into the algorithms, and it's become automated. And it's sold to us on the basis of, isn't this wonderful? And it's so convenient. Is it so convenient? I mean, I'm hungry, I want a pizza. I just take the app and I go bang, bang, bang. And 10 minutes later, you have someone knock at the door with a pizza. I mean, isn't that wonderful? And all this thing. And the other side is the scary side, which has a hell of a lot to do with surveillance. You know, what the state wants to know about you. And yeah, so there you've got this surveillance of your own life movements. Yeah.
Do you know, Michael, I heard that one of the big ICT players are now going to go on ground level with wearable computing and start recording in the public space. And some analyst was talking about the distinction between a street view vehicle systematically going through neighborhoods and filming from the street view cameras on the cars versus the actual wearing on the human. You know, and the difference between a camera on a car or a camera on a ceiling or an outside window or wall versus that which is placed on the human body. The closest to becoming a what is to shove a camera on someone and let them go roaming around recording others who are whos in the public space. And by doing that, we're reducing them to the what. How far do you think we're going to go with this surveillance?
Well, the sky's the limit. It all depends. This too is a question of interplay. And because all interplay is a movement, and you've got players in this movement, it's always a situation with players. And the players, because they move, they have powers. I mean, power is nothing other than a force that expresses itself in an energy of being at work in a movement. So it's not as if we humans are passive, just passive objects. We are not objects, and I'd say we're not subjects either. Underlying all movement, we are players. We are players in interplay, and we play the interplay because we express and put our powers to work, whatever they might be. And the power, I mean, the power to stand up physically is just one power. I mean, the power to think something through, the power to inform myself. These things are all part of the interplay, so that when it comes to surveillance, like this is something which isn't all pleasant, and it's dangerous because you have someone, you know, you have an authority wanting to control your life movements, individually or collectively, whatever. And this calls on a resisting power. And this resisting power itself is not simply a reaction in a Newtonian sense of a what acting to something else, but it is a who acting according to an understanding of what's going on and saying, I'm resisting this. I don't want this to happen. I'll do what I can do to resist this eventuality of being surveilled.
This reminds me of an article that MG Michael and I wrote, inspired by the words of a friend of ours, Catherine Albrecht, who said to us, there has to be a paper written on not resistance is futile, but resistance is not futile. So we wrote that paper about 7-8 years ago, and I'm sure that is underlying in your work. With Dr. Robert Abbas, the program chair of this conference, we actually do spend a lot of time on value chain analysis in our development work and design work. And we talk about the importance of knowing the players, those that are operational, those that are non-operational, those that are indirect, those that are direct, the users. This power of the users, Michael, are we so manipulated as end users that we don't understand what's going on in our world? What's happened to our powerlessness? Where has that perceived powerlessness come from? This notion that resistance is futile.
I think it has a lot to do with this seduction by the ontology of productive power, because the only ontology of movement we have is this productive one, and if you see that, okay, we're not in control, we're not the one source from which emanates the control over the movement, then okay, then what are we? We are the passive objects being worked upon, the passive what's. But if you have the ontology of interplay, and it's a matter of estimating mutually each other's powers, then it's never such a one-sided thing. It's always a matter of interplay, and you can't tie it down. And this goes hand in hand with getting away from the idea of a power being put to work along the timeline. We have a one-dimensional conception of time, and it's no accident that this is the case. And you can go right back to Aristotle, whose conception of time is basically the modern one, the modern traditional one, which is you got now instants flowing from the future into the present and then onto the past along this timeline. And Aristotle says you can count them, and you can count them. I mean, it's very useful to count them. We wouldn't be able to meet in a Zoom meeting without having clocks to kind of synchronize the movements. So that's one understanding of time as a kind of counting sequence along a line, which is derivative of movement. It's only counting, it's just tabulating it. But the other conception of movement, which is deeper, and it corresponds to the openness of interplay, where you've got players and you've got no control. You've got attempts to control, but you've got no control because you've got other players. This means that time itself is open, and what someone intends, one player intends, or what another player intends, and what comes out of it, and so it's up in the air. So you can say, with regard to the future, you can't say there's a future coming along the line and we can say what's going to come. You can say there's an open space. The future is an open dimension. The present itself is an open dimension because it depends upon how you assess your situation now. And there's various ways of assessing your situation now. So there's not ever any one unique situation now. And the same applies to the past. You can't say, like in the traditional sense, you've got an event, the event happened, it is now past, and all we have is a memory of it, but this event is just fixed as it was. We live also in the open dimension of the past, of what has been, and we also have to understand it in some way. Like we're always interpreting and reinterpreting what has been. So we're always in this hermeneutic situation of interpretation. What has been, what is now, and what may come. And these interpretations can differ greatly from each other. both within an age and also between ages.
What happens when we add the virtual domain and the virtual space, the online world, into this movement and into this understanding? Can you tell us what might be occurring in humanity as we see it today around the globe with this additional dimension? Because I've heard people, for example, being zoomed out. There's like for professionals or academics, there's Zoom after Zoom, and so it's instant. We can hit the button and go, we're on, but then we're in this like faster but slower space, like this time warp. But what's going on with the additional layer of that virtual transaction now with virtual products?
Yeah, it's, I see it, I call it the cyber world. I call it the cyber world, and it means it's taken off. It's taken off. It's encroaching year by year, exponentially fast. You don't recognize the world of 10 years ago. Like things move so fast. And it's a kind of surrogate world. It's a, you could say it's a kind of doubling of world, because you've got very smart programmers who have made the use of the algorithms extremely simple, right? So for the user, it seems as if like you've always got the analog. You've always got the analog of what you do physically in the normal world, and you're used to doing it. And the programmers have worked out a way of providing a digital interface where you're actually doing the equivalent in an analogous way, but everything is then mediated by algorithms. And it gives you, but it gives you control, it gives you mastery over movement in a sense, like you can actually do a lot of things via this dimension of the digits, the binary code that lets you do things. And at the same time, it also prevents you from doing things. And it also forces you to do things by the cyber world encroaching on the physical world. It means that certain things that we're used to doing in the physical world just disappear.
Yes, they are.
And just disappear.
In supply chains.
And supply chain, because through the algorithms, and this is where the algorithms come in the sense of the ontology of productive movement. They can really do a lot of things extremely efficiently. And this is where capital is very interested in these algorithms, because they do things very efficiently. What happens, that means they do it also very cheaply. So there is a pressure, a competitive pressure to algorithmize, thus automate certain procedures as much as you can, because it's cheaper, and because the cyber world is also a space. It's a digital space. It has the same characteristics as our world space, our physical world space. You can orient yourself in it. You can orient yourself in cyberspace, and like with the, you can know where you're going. You can bring things near, which is what you do in the physical world too. Like you can come near to things. You can put them away. So the cyberspace has these characteristics of the physical space, so you can actually treat it like that. It's nevertheless a surrogate. It's just nevertheless, but it also usurps what we've become used to in the physical world. So that certain things just disappear. Like,
look at the terms and conditions, right? It's almost sometimes the interplay is not on an equal footing. We're studying terms and conditions for children and youth at the moment through one of the standards in IEEE, and we're talking about the fairness How fair is it to be doing an exchange or a contract with children, and those terms and conditions which can't even be understood by lawyers? How will they be understood by everyday people? So it's almost like they're trying to mimic the same world in the digital world, in the cyber world, as you call it, but the terms of exchange are even more watered down and more lopsided in that interplay that you're describing to us. And so the end user thinks they're getting a bargain, but doesn't realize they haven't read the fine print. I don't know how to explain it any different than that.
Yeah, there's an absolute seductiveness because it's always pushing what you can do, and it's so easy. You can just talk to Alexa and say, get that, and yeah, and it comes, it comes. And so you have children like running up there to the bills of their parents on for certain things.
Yeah,
but it can be dangerous. Yeah, but the other thing about the cyber world, which really impresses me, and I didn't understand it for a long time but the way U.S. capitalism, Silicon Valley, really understood it very early on, in that it regarded the whole cyber world, this is the potential digital world market. They understood that. They already had, you already have US capitalism, which is based, its success is based upon it being one great big country. It has a lot of wealth. I mean, it's unfairly distributed, but you've got a lot of wealth. So you have this enormous market, mass market. So mass market capitalism really, learned its basics in the 50s and 60s in America, and was then, it's gone all around the world. But the shift to the cyber world means that via the algorithms, which once they're written, they're scalable. It means that this kind of capitalism is able to become, in a sense, literally worldwide, but as a cyber world market. And that's kind of given a new lease of life to capitalism, to exploit the possibilities of making gain in this medium of the cyber world.
Michael, these are incredible observations that we could spend whole lectures on. And I'm thinking here even over the latest Silicon Valley persuasion that we could possibly even overcome death, although this has been a recurring theme in literature. We're now getting people saying, well, you can just get a brain implant and in 50 years' time, we'll be able to download the mind. And there are many who believe it. What's going on here? Is it that these people are selling the idea that you can overcome death now, that even death has become digitized, that we can create forms of ourselves in a digital afterlife that we can keep here on Earth? What's going on with it?
Well, I'd say the big thing is the confusion between what and who that's going on here, because you have these days, and it's not just these days, but it's been increasingly so over the centuries, that the brain is equated with the mind, or the other way around. The mind is equated with the brain, and the brain is actually something material enclosed in a body, but the body regarded as a thing. The body regarded as a thing that can be studied and manipulated and fixed up and medicated and whatever. I call the body in this sense the corpus. Yes. But I call the body of a who the body. That's the existential body. The existential, it is my body. Whereas the corpus, the physical body, is a what. and it's not really mine. It's something that can be subject to treatment. Same thing applies to the distinction between the mind and the brain. If the mind is reduced to the brain, and maybe the whole central nervous system, okay, it's a what. It's a what. It can be studied, and the neuroscientists are busy studying it and trying to figure out how the brain works, and they're wanting from that to causally explain what goes on in the mind, which is today called consciousness. And consciousness, consciousness as such is a philosophical invention of the 17th century. It's associated with Descartes. And this consciousness is, I am conscious of myself. I co-know myself is the core of this Cartesian metaphysics of the subject. And the main, or one of the main features of this subject, which is a consciousness, is it's encapsulated. There's a distinction to be made between the inside consciousness and the outside, the external world. And once you've got that going, you've got an inside-outside dichotomy going, then it's very easy to see that this consciousness is located somewhere, namely in the brain. This is exactly, at least the thinking part of consciousness, cogito ergo sum, this cogitation is located by Descartes in a part of the brain. And this is all extremely convenient for a what ontology, I mean, an ontology that's going to be able to control and master movement, namely the movements of the human mind. But it's also, it's a dream. It's a dream that the mind, which is something you actually have to ask the question, what is the mind? Does it exist somewhere? Is it aware? Can you say that the mind exists inside anything at all? Does it make any sense to talk about an inside the mind and an outside the mind? And the same thing you can say is about consciousness. Is consciousness the appropriate word for what really characterizes what we call human being? And it's a consciousness is the word that's substituted for what the Greeks called the psyche, and what was thereafter called the soul. And the soul is a word that science frowns upon as unscientific, but it probably is unscientific in the sense that it evades the grasp of being locatable anywhere, and therefore it evades the grasp of being situated in a certain part of the body, whether it's the heart or the brain or the two combined. You say the psyche itself is something quite mysterious. It's what I'd say is it has the psyche itself has everything to do with the three-dimensional openness of time itself. And this is what is characteristic, at least of us as humans, is that we are this openness. We are this openness to this three-dimensionality of time. I have a future, I have a present, I have a past, and I situate myself always within this three-dimensional time. But that really goes against the grain in any kind of scientific analysis of what human being is that proceeds from consciousness.
In your book, you talk about the difference between technique and technology, and you also graced many of our IEEE Technology and Society magazine pages over the last 5-6 years. tell us why technique is important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I used technique in one of those papers I published with you on, what's it called? Technology, technique, interplay.
Yes.
And I used technique there in the middle, technology, technique, interplay, because technique has a kind of intermediate status between the two. You can't talk about the technology of lovemaking because you know it's nonsense.
Yes.
But you may try,
Yes.
you may try to do a technology of lovemaking, but you can sensibly talk of a technique of lovemaking, which is not just you have to have a fine feeling. You have to know the erotic nuances, and then in fact you are in an interplay with someone else.
Yes.
And so you have to, your technique has to be fashioned to the situation you're in with the other. And maybe as a intermediate step, you can say, like, if you play a musical instrument, then you'll know all about it. You need a technique, and this technique is not a technology, and it's not simply a matter of technical mastery. It's not just a technical thing. It's a technique of playing the piano or playing a guitar or any instrument. It goes beyond. It has to do with your relationship to the instrument, and in fact, it involves an interplay in the sense that you have to have a regard and esteem and an estimation of your instrument and conform to what it says is to be done. Like every single guitar is different, every piano is different, and you know the difference, and only through your finesse of technique can you say something about it and actually do something about it.
I remember in that.
That's my short answer, or long answer.
That's a short answer. I think everyone should read that paper because I still remember it. I still think about it all the time. The poetry in there, art, drawing, singing, all those natural things, the lovemaking you mentioned. I think you also talk about truth in that paper from memory, but I can't recall 100%. But now we have the criticism that comes back, oh, Katina, or oh, Michael, you're nostalgic. We can have sex with robots. We can get an AI to masterfully recreate music that you've never heard before. They can conglomerate all the world's music together and produce this brilliant thing that sounds human. And so with the mimicry, going back to the philosophers, what do we know, Michael? This mimicry that is not, it's not real. We talk about artificial intelligence or machine intelligence. What intelligence, right? Are we going to still have to face these criticisms that we're nostalgic or where our sensibilities are different? Or we'll get over it,
Well, there's a lot of bad music around. I mean, I don't know. It's very. When I listen to quite a lot of music, and I can say there's a whole lot of music which is totally uninteresting. But it's churned out, and every now and again I come across a piece and I go, wow, what's going on there? So it has to do with what I call Geist, mind, or spirited mind. There's no Geist in it.
Yes.
And I suppose you already have to be inspired by Geist to be able to interpret the world and experience the world that way. And there's no way, it's not an argument. It's an experience you have to make that there is good art, there is bad art.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, comes back to your question about technique, that you have to have a fine feeling for the things, and also kind of experience. Like you learn over years and years. Like I remember as a student buying my first LP of 12-tone music, Schoenberg. You know, I thought, okay, yeah, I'm an intelligent guy, and I put this record on and I played it, and what's this? Terrible! It's terrible, right? And it took me literally years before I understood it and said, "Wow!" So it's definitely a matter of learning to appreciate, and this appreciation is another kind of estimation, valuation, and it comes with experience of being able to make the comparison between the good and the bad, and the good and the not so good, and the mediocre, and so it's an experience you make also with yourself. So, and it's.
I think you've hit on something important, because I think, to be honest, as a parent who's relied upon by a spouse and children and parents and siblings and vice versa, I think we're less and less actually giving ourselves this time. We're becoming like our machines. We're becoming like those endless emails that come through our inbox, the endless voicemails, the endless transactions. We're almost becoming digital in our practice. You know, kids now won't generally speaking, you know, if they're at the train station and need to be picked up, they won't call through. They'll text one word, here, you know, or now, or something. But I resist the temptation, and more recently have been going over and over this idea of time is love, or love for oneself, love for others, care, all of these things, these virtues, generally speaking, that have sort of, we're the upgrade generation now. We're the throwaway generation. You know, you buy a printer, it's harder to get toner, just chuck it out and we'll get a new printer. It's easier, right? We're this, like the frozen pizza generation, or the fast food. In fact, we don't even go to the fast food store to sit down. We go through the drive-through because it's faster, and the kids don't want to get out because, oh, it's too hard to get out. So where is all this going, Michael? Where are we headed if we keep going like this?
Well, I think I don't know. It down the drain, I'd say. But
Famous expression.
What I'm interested in is the precondition for doing anything about it is to gain a critical distance from it, to see what's going on, and not just be immersed in it and absorbed by it, and then have your life habits dictated by those routines that you get into through convenience, which are deadly, because once you're in them, in these habits, they are kind of convenient. And if you just, this is the way I live, and you don't have any distance from it, you're in it. You're in it. And that's what that's another aspect of what I like about the word conscience. It's Latin, conscientia. It means co-knowing. Like you are who you do what you do in your life, and you know what you're doing, right? But you also co-know, like yourself is looking at what you're doing. So you've got another instance of you're just doing things like without reflection, and you've got this reflective self which is actually looking at what you're doing, and this gives you a kind of a distance, a potential distance from yourself to say, hey, what am I doing here? And this self is actually formed by adopting existential possibilities that the world offers to you. Yourself is nothing other than the existential possibilities you adopt as your own and belong to me. These are my existential possibilities. They belong to me as myself. Myself is not something inside. It's something that I exist, that I form and modify precisely through this interplay with the world, with the possibilities that the world offers to me. So I see just learning to see yourself and see the situation we're in, that the cyber world certainly offers certain existential possibilities, but it also offers or imposes existential dangers, and you first have to learn to see them. You have to, and it comes down to what do you want to do? What do I want to do? What do my kids want to do with this lifetime? And this lifetime is, and I plead there for three-dimensional time, this openness of, there are three open dimensions, and in the openness to the future, the temporal dimension of the future, these are the offerings that a certain world will offer you in the power interplay with it. Yeah, but you first have to learn to see. So I put the emphasis on learning to see and to see the phenomena very, very simply, to try and get as close as you can to the phenomena, instead of being madly interested in being able to control them, that is, control movement, which is what science is all about. Yes. Technoscience is all about. And there's something other than controlling movement, and having a distance from all these techno-scientific possibilities, especially those offered through the cyber world, can be, in a fairly literal sense, life-saving. The problems you have with attention deficit disorder since television has become the medium, and it still is an incredible medium. Now you've got, on top of that, you've got YouTube and simply this absorption of young minds into the cyber world in the sense of videos, which is as a substitute, as a next level beyond TV. It really does something to you. When it does something to your mind, and it closes off other possibilities. Mm-hmm. Like if you're constantly absorbed with the next video you just have to watch with your screen time, then what about the possibilities you had of reading books which can take your mind somewhere completely different? Without books, I mean, books are vehicles for transporting you to completely other worlds, completely different worlds. And I'm not just talking about fantasy and science fiction, taking you to another country, to another historical age. You're in another world.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can experience that world in some way and gain another interpretation of it. And I think when reading is so important there, because words are the way we really get close to things.
Michael, when we take the analogy of the television, and it's the screen time that's often auto-cued, so the young people don't realize there's just another video, another video, another video. You don't press stop, you just keep streaming. What happens when that functionality through ubervalence, MG Michael's ubervalence, enters the body in some capacity? What then? What are your reflections on that final question that I have?
Wow. Übervalence is the last invasion, isn't it? It's like when you are really then turned into a component part of the cyber world, and it has direct access to you through your body. And I mean, it's one of the terminal stations of whatness, becoming a what. So I think it's something to be treated with a lot of care. When it starts with pacemakers for the heart, then you say, okay, yeah. but you have to realize that when you have a heart problems and you've had an infarct or the danger of an infarct, or you need something to regularize that, and you have this thing implanted in your body. That's okay. I'd say yes. I'd say yes, but I know my heart is weak, or I'm in danger of just dropping dead. But when it starts to link up with the neuronal system, and they start having fantasies about thought transfer and all this, and it gets really dangerous, because then what is a thought? And if you interpret the thought as a brain pattern, as a pattern of neurons, which is what they do, they're looking, when the neuroscience look to the brain to find out the analogons of what's going on in what they call consciousness. So your thoughts, they want to say the thoughts are somehow mirrored in neural activity in a certain part of the brain, and they've got a whole long way in just doing this mapping. What does it mean? It means, and in the background, they have this dream or this implicit understanding that it's all causal, and the causal business, it goes from the matter to consciousness. Why? It's causality, cause and effect is it's a belief about productive movement, but it's a belief about, and if you believe in cause and effect, it means you believe in a certain kind of productive movement, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. And it means you believe in one-dimensional time, along which things happen predictably and calculably. But if it isn't that way, then it opens things up again. So I'd be very careful about it. I think the neuroscience is very seductive, because it's suggesting or claiming that it's got the answers. It's got that this causality is somehow there in principle. It's just that the brain is incredibly complex, and we'll get there someday. Yes. 50 years we'll have it out, right? And you've got all these predictions of when will a computer working along the lines of artificial neural networks, when is it going to exceed the powers of the human brain? And the human brain is equated with the human mind. And I mean, that's just fantastic nonsense, because the mind is not this thing that's reducible to something material at all.
Well, Dr. Michael Eldred, thank you for speaking to us at East Has 20. There'll be a compendium paper and a book that's coming out as well. For our audience that doesn't have a philosophy background, for the greater part, this is an integral and vital talk in the whole conference, because you've been very careful to break it down for us, Michael, in such an incredibly eloquent way. I will never forget this notion of interplay. I will never forget the different movements, the power, the fact that players have power, and we can have a say in what goes on, but also the benefits that are coming, the risks and the challenges that you've so eloquently described to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katina. It's been a beautiful conversation, and you've said some wonderful things to really get me going.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to have this opportunity to be able to speak to you this symposium.
Our honor to have you. For those who don't know, Michael plays the guitar and sings. He has lots of audios on his website. Is it artifact.org?
Yeah, artifact with a hyphen, arte-fact.org, yeah.
And I'll make sure to put it in this video. And many books on Marx, many translations, Capital and Technology, Marx and Heidegger, first published in Left Curve in 2000. Social Ontology, recasting political philosophy through a phenomenology of whoness with Ontos in 2008. Social Ontology of whoness, rethinking core phenomena of political philosophy. The Digital Cast of Being, Metaphysics, Mathematics, Cartesianism, Cybernetics, Capitalism, Communication, again with Ontos in 2009. Movement and Time in the Cyberworld, as Michael mentioned. Turing's Cyberworld of timelessly copulating bit strings. Technology, Technique and Interplay, a version of which was published in Tech and Society as well. Digital Whoness with Raphael Capiro and Daniel Nagel, A Question of Time, an alternative cast of mind. Thinking of Music, which I look forward to reading, An Approach Along a Parallel Path, and so many others. I encourage you to go to Arte, spelled ARTE-fact.org. Michael Eldred, thank you for spending an hour with us.
Thank you, Katina. It's been great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.